All right. As it continues to move up, I will go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. I'm Rebecca Green. I'm the founder of Dear Producer. For those of you who are new to Dear Producer, I created the website in 2017 to help bring the producing community together and to educate the industry on what it is producers actually do. The site has grown very quickly, but it's still a volunteer effort. I run it on my own and I don't have any staff. So if you find this webinar helpful and you're able to, please consider making a donation so that I can continue to keep all the content free, which is really important to me. You can make donations on the Dear Producer site, and also be sure to sign up for the newsletter if you're not already, because we'll be doing a few more of these webinars as we go through dealing with COVID-19. I do have three amazing sponsors, Genuine Article Pictures, Cinereach, and the Nevada City Film Festival's Nevada City Film Festival's Creative Producer Residency. I want to thank them so much for their support, which has allowed me to continue to do this work and which has made these webinars possible. To give us as much time as possible for the discussion, I'm not going to spend time going through everyone's bios, but you can find them on the Dear Producer website where you registered if you haven't read them already. If you have a question, add it to the Q&A box that's at the bottom, not in the chat. And I suggest putting your screen on gallery mode, which you can do at the top right corner of your screen. So let's get into the conversation. So over the last few weeks, there have been a lot of conversations happening around film festivals, but most of them have been from the viewpoint of programmers and sales agents. So I wanted to have a conversation about festivals with producers from the producer point of view. So thank you to Karen and Brian and Marilyn for joining us today for this conversation. So I'll be honest, I personally have a love-hate relationship with festivals. I have worked for them for many years. I've been fortunate to have some of my films premiere at top festivals, and I'm really good friends with a lot of the people that run festivals. But over the past few years, the bigger festivals have become so exclusive and so expensive for most people to experience. And at times, they often seem to cater more towards distributors than filmmakers. And also in most of these festival conversations that have been happening, regional festivals have been left out of the conversation, but they are a big part of the ecosystem and shouldn't be forgotten. So we're gonna talk about regional festivals as well today. So for this conversation, I want to dig into the role film festivals play in the life cycle of a film. And while all the festivals are on pause right now, for us to have a discussion about whether or not there's a better way forward once everyone resets. So first I wanted to talk to the panelists about, asking the question, who do festivals serve? And in a recent article, Tom Powers, who's the artistic director of Doc NYC and programs for TIFF, said, right now, every film festival shares the same ambition, get smarter about how to connect with audiences online. And Noah Cowan, who used to run SF Film Festival and had worked for TIFF, said in his article, festivals are currently torn between their bedrock mission of gathering local communities around film and staying relevant to their audiences, which is currently happening with a rush to online screenings and other digital initiatives. So the question for the panelists to get started is, from the top festivals to regional festivals, everyone has a different agenda. So I want to know from you guys, each of you, how do you define a film festival and what do you think its purpose is? Who should film festivals serve? Is it the filmmaker first? Is it audiences? Is it the city in which they take place? Is it distributors or sales agents? And all these different agendas, like how do you feel the priority should go and where do you feel the role film festivals play is in the independent film cycle? Who wants to go first? Marilyn, you want to start?
Sure. I mean, for me, I think the festival experience is very much, it's the one place, barring theatrical and not in every case, where filmmakers can commune with audiences and audiences can commune with artists. And I think the beauty of festivals, and particularly regional festivals, is the way in which it brings communities together to celebrate art in their own communities, which hopefully builds community ties for a year-long celebration of the arts. So for me, when I understand and really sympathize with all of the filmmakers who lost their premieres in light of the pandemic and all of the festivals who are trying to stay alive with a pandemic breathing down their necks and canceling their festivals. But I really, I want people to be careful about building models for forever that are addressing this particular moment in time. And so how do you, I think for festivals and for filmmakers, how do you stay true to your identity and the guiding principle for your being in the world? That's how I'm feeling right now in this particular moment, locked in a house, you know.
Karin?
I think that word identity is really good. You know, when I teach producing, I always teach a section called Film Festival Strategy, because it's really a strategy how producers and filmmakers have to think about their film festival life. And the first thing I say is we have to understand, you know, and this is learned from the mistakes I've made as an emerging producer and young producer, that film festivals don't exist to altruistically serve filmmakers. I think that festivals have multiple qualities, and they have a lot of different values that they can bring to a film, but they're also serving all the things you just said, their community, their audience. Some of them are drivers of tourism in the area they're in. That was the original reason for them being founded, you know, and I think that the filmmaker can benefit from what a film festival does. And different film festivals have different benefits for filmmakers. But it's really important to understand what a film festival's identity is, because Sundance has a very different identity than Cannes, than Nevada City Film Festival. And I think that this is a time at this moment where filmmakers and producers were being asked to really drill down on what value a specific film festival can bring to our film, because we have to decide if it's enough value to show online and jeopardize other opportunities, right? So it's this really interesting moment where we have to distill the values that film festivals bring. So we have this, we're in this moment where we have to hold kind of two truths, right? We have to hold this truth that film festivals contribute value, you know, to the industry, to the ecosystem we're in. And we have to hold a truth that film festivals also have problems, you know, that they also have competing agendas, competing to our film's best interests. And that's, you know, that's a conversation hopefully we'll get to dig into.
Brian?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to answer some of these questions because it's really complex. And every festival has its different values, and every filmmaker, and actually the type of film and everything weighs into your decisions on these things. But I think, and also you can't make any blanket statement about any single, all the festivals are doing X, Y, or Z. But because like not every festival is moving online either. There are some film festivals that have said we're going to skip a year, and they're doing other things. We've seen that as well. It's not that everyone's moving online. So I think it's really hard to weigh, but I do think that while there are all these different constituents that a festival serves, and its local audience being a big one, it's a time now when, because filmmakers are also struggling, and we're in a situation where, because of a pandemic, we're having to reinvent certain things. We need to have the voice of the filmmakers at that table making those decisions. And I know for a fact some festivals are doing this. I've gotten calls from film festivals that are sitting there calling producers left and right to get their opinions, but there's definitely some decisions being made that it seems like are not being consultative with filmmakers at all times. And so that's what I've been calling for, is just more of the open dialogue like this one and others that are starting to happen, to make sure that whatever we do rebuild not only serves audiences and helps keep festivals alive, but also helps keep filmmakers alive.
Well, and you know, do we need festivals is a very big question to ask. You know, I think I don't, there's so many major ones, there's thousands of regional festivals. And so for you guys as producers, what is the festival value to you? Marilyn?
I mean, it varies depending. I think producers really weigh in on this as we move through our producing lives and have different films that are meant to have different lives in the world. And I think there's something we were talking about before when we were preparing for the panel, the idea that everyone thinks they're chasing this one holy grail, right? Premiere at Sundance with all your rights available, with the intention of having this beautifully windowed theatrical, followed by broadcast, followed by streaming, with a vibrant festival life, all in time for some awards run at the end of the year, and you tie it up with a bow. And that's just not reality for 99% of the people out there. And most of the festivals, the films that they're serving, once you get past a certain number of early top tier festivals. And so I feel like that really considering what is the function of a festival in the life of a film, what is the role of festivals in the larger ecosystem of the business of filmmaking? Because I think when we step away from the idea of everyone needing to survive with, you know, sound business practices in mind, that's where things become unsustainable. So it's a hard question to answer what's the role specifically, but I think it will divide between some festivals, not all, are intended to launch the life of a film, and I wish they would launch the lives of the new voices. And some festivals are intended to be part of kind of, dare I say, marketing, of like finding your audience and having it written about in local papers so that when it hopefully goes on to have a vibrant ongoing life, streaming or otherwise, people know how to find it. You know, they've heard about it. You've like raised their attention. So I think festivals live in those two camps, and we need to work them into the whole holistic life cycle of a film's life in the world.
Right, but right now it's like we're set up with, you start with Sundance and then you kind of go through the rest of the year, or maybe you start with Toronto, and versus shifting these in ways that maybe work better based on what type of festival you are and the types of films that you want to program, versus it being, let's premiere all the big films at Sundance and then all the regional films just kind of start pulling from those festivals, right, down through the line.
Or what kind of film are you, and what filmmaker, what's your wish for the life of your film? And because maybe it doesn't start there. And I think so many filmmakers are feeling like, if I don't get this holy grail, my film hasn't made it, when there's a whole life it can have.
Yeah, I mean, that's taught very early at the film festival level, or sorry, the film school level of, you know, I read a lot of applications for different organizations, and almost, you know, I would say 75% of every application says my goal is to premiere at Sundance and have A24 buy my movie, right? Like, but if you really look at the lineups of the major festivals, like you said, a big portion of them is dedicated to launching films that already have distribution. They are part of the marketing plan, you know, with Netflix having 9 films at Sundance this year. Like, I think filmmakers aren't necessarily tuning into how the bigger festivals are shifting in different ways, yet we're all still aiming for that coveted slot, that golden ticket. Yeah. Karin?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, what you just talked about, sales is a big part of the festival allure, you know, because sales is about creating a perception and creating momentum. Those are intangible things, I think, that are, as far as I can tell, or as far as I can think, they're impossible to create through an online festival. But beyond sales, I mean, in terms of, you know, festival value, I think about China, you know, where I do a lot of work. And there was a few years where there were no independent film festivals allowed in China. So I've lived in a reality where there have been no festivals, no online festivals, no ability to gather, freedom of assembly taken away. And I would not wish that on anybody. And it made me realize, oh, those festivals were absolutely vital to sustaining this kind of other intangible thing called community. It was the one place where filmmakers could go and see each other and reflect on each other and exchange. And, you know, so there's something to that. I think that's incredibly important to how a culture moves forward. You know, I think that the value that festivals provide to audiences, especially local audiences and regional audiences, is huge. Again, it's that intangible community building. But, you know, that's all to say, like, I still complain about film festivals. Like, as a producer, I've never had my travel covered for a film festival. Sometimes I have to beg for an accreditation to attend a festival where my film is premiering, you know? So there are, you know, and that speaks to how strapped most film festivals are. how their operating models, are also really, are so tight that a lot of them can't go forward in this moment. They can't pivot even online because that requires more resources than they have. So I think the problem, like, Brian was saying, it's so complex and it's such a big topic. But the value of film festivals is, I think, is intangible in a way that we cannot recreate online.
Brian, you want to jump in?
Well, I just think there's also some things that there's some exceptions, like Hot Docs was able to put together a lot of meetings virtually, and those are really good. But there's also the intangible things of, especially if you're a filmmaker who's not connected, or maybe you're not living in the big cities, or you're a diverse filmmaker, and being able to just bump into an important film executive or someone who might work on your film. Some of those things it's not very easy to recreate online right now. And maybe there is a way, and we need to figure that out. But a lot of my career and filmmakers I know, it was literally they bumped into someone and had a beer with them at a film fest, and that changed everything for their career. So I'd like to see a way to recreate that. The thing I hate about some film festivals, not all, is what you kind of hinted at with this starting at Sundance and then all these other festivals. I feel like there's this like package of films that just go from Sundance to every single film fest, and they're not actually discovering new films at some of these places. They're just rehashing the same films. And what's even crazier is some of those are films that are going to end up on Netflix about a month later anyways. And before Netflix existed, and not just to pick on them by any means, but before streaming existed, I could kind of make sense of that in some ways. And you do want to bring some things that your audience wants to see, but there are so many films out there that are getting overlooked. And I really question, do we need to focus on those films that are going to end up on the big streamers anyways, especially in this moment? And also when those films are going to potentially end up on those streamers, have the most problems with doing online premieres with festivals. So it seems like a good opportunity to focus on the other 98% for a moment as well.
Well, go ahead.
Well, I just would say I agree. It's like all these films are traveling together. So if that is going to be the model, then why is everyone doing this as a one-off? And there isn't some collaboration at least happening. And I'm not sure, I don't think I like that as a model, but if all these film festivals are individually marketing, doing their lists, finding sponsorships, is there not some economy of scale that then makes them a formidable player that also allows them to bring the talent to the festival, dare I say, pay them a fee for appearing, not just a fee to the distributor if there is a distributor attached, but is there a way to put it into the ecosystem that allows everyone to benefit more? If the festivals are so on the margins and the filmmakers are living on the margins, everyone's in this red line, how do we, then let's accept that as the business model and build it wisely. But I think I'm with you that I would rather see more diversity in programming and finding local artists and lifting up voices that haven't been heard. I think that would be preferable for the film community.
I think some of the conversations are starting to happen through the Festival Alliance, actually. But I would like to see a little bit more coordination to build some network effects and scale, because I know filmmakers that have called me about their films lately that would love to play 100 different regional film fests, but the problem is because they're all scattered throughout the year, it doesn't work with building an alternative release. But if they could build all of that at the same time and get some kind of network effect onto their films, that would be really helpful. So I think this is a good time to think about all those kind of new changes. And the Festival Alliance is definitely addressing some of those, but I think we need more of it than we've gotten so far. I know when I used to run the Atlanta Film Fest, we moved our festival dates a couple times, mainly because we were just trying to get filmmakers there and not be competing with another festival. But right now is a moment when if 20 festivals were at the same time and I could do all the Q&As back, at the same time, and I could get that network effect on social media, it would be so much better for my movie than doing it spread out over time.
and better for filmmakers who usually can't even work if they're on the circuit. You know, you can't be shooting and traveling and unpredictably getting invited to things. So there is a, if we look, you know, when you open the question, and I thought, well, the community to serve as the festivals and the filmmakers, there's something that could happen there that would make it work better for everyone. But again, I agree, it requires consensus and collaborative working in ways where people had been, you know, running on their own. So it's hard to organize, I think, maybe, but would be nice to see.
The collaborative effort, I think, is what I've been really looking for during this time from organizations. And that kind of happens in the spring. There's a group of regional spring festivals, like my film, I'll See You in My Dreams, premiered at Sundance. Bleecker Street picked it up and they released it in May, which is really short for a distributor to pick something up and run with it. But we were one of their first films. And so then they took us on the spring circuit, and we did, you know, Cleveland, which I now know is my favorite festival, and River Run, and Sarasota, and Dallas, and we did all of those within, you know, February and May, and it was a really great, you know, effort to kind of hit these regional festivals. But then, like, now when I look back, I'm like, oh, well, but we took slots. We already had distribution. We took slots at these great festivals. But then the argument could be, well, but our film, we had, like, Bleecker Street paid for cast, they paid for the director, you know, and so does that help those festivals by bringing Sundance films, you know, because I feel like there should be an expiration. Like, if you do so many regional festivals, there should be like a cutoff so that other filmmakers can be put in the pipeline. But then also too, I was new to this, and I didn't realize, oh wait, me not working for 4 months then really was a problem when I finished, that I wasn't thinking about, because I hadn't done that before. We were just having a good time in that way.
And the idea of, do the filmmakers who could be, you know, have space to be discovered in these regional festivals, how do you slot that into a business plan? But one of the things I also found really troubling a little bit as people were proposing online festivals is the festivals were the ones who said, if films are streaming, we can't invite them because folks won't come. But now that they need programming to be online, they're saying, don't worry about your streaming deals. And so, you know, there is a give and take in the relationship of what do the festivals get from it? What do the filmmakers get from it? So I'm just going to keep beating the same drum of, like, how do we make this mutually beneficial to the whole ecology?
Well, yeah, I felt like, and that can kind of lead us into the next section, which is these virtual festivals. And I think that there was a feeling from the film community of, you know, just that we all knew that. And so, like, that immediate pivot to virtual, it's like, well, wait a minute, all this time you've been saying one thing. So it really felt like it was in service of the festival to be doing that, and how much came back to the filmmakers in terms of, like, Brian's piece was, where is the filmmakers in virtual festivals? And I think a lot of us were really thrown when that started happening very quickly, and now it's just happening one after the other. And so Brian, do you want to start? Like, do we feel like virtual festivals happened too quickly, or is it like, did it have to, because these festivals have to survive? Like, could they have all just paused for a minute to figure it out, or did they really have to pivot so quickly to a virtual system?
Well, I think the answer is they had to pivot that quickly. That's why they did it. I mean, you know, I don't think they would have done it right away if they didn't feel forced. And some people have the luxury of more time to wait. Some people didn't have the luxury to switch to virtual because they got hit so quick. And I do think I was on a different panel with Tim from Cartimquin the other day with the Film Collaborative that's going to be online soon. And he pointed out that as these festivals are learning, some of them are making their offers better, and they're coming up with systems that work better for filmmakers. At the time that I wrote my piece, which also, by the way, most people miss the fact that I basically said 98% of films should do it, because it's not going to hurt their films. It's a small subset that it's a problem for. But it was also at a time when there were a lot more things popping up online with different models that didn't necessarily work. And some, I don't want to call anyone out, but some that were, you know, for-profit ventures, but not giving much money to the filmmakers. It's a different scenario for some other festivals, and I understand that. One thing I would say, though, is, like, I was talking to a sales agent from Europe who was pointing out that if, you know, the festivals did bind together a little bit more and collaborate a little bit more and build out a better payment system, that for a significant number of films, maybe 99% of films, it would be a strong revenue source that could replace other types of distribution. As a small number of films that are going to get a Netflix deal or an Amazon deal or whatever, but it's just hard to do when everybody's system's different and there's no standardization. Luckily in Europe, which is a whole different scenario where the sales agent was telling me this from, there are producers organizations that are almost like real unions working on behalf of producers, and they're starting to lobby for certain types of rules for how these things work, what types of films can play in them, and what kind of payment schemes need to be put in place. But in the US, we've got, you know, us coming together talking. There's not the equivalent of those unions. Anyways, that's a long answer, but I think that's what I was thinking about when I wrote the piece, and what I'm starting to think about as I talk to more producers as a result of it.
Karen, you want to jump in?
Yeah, you know, I can talk about a specific, you know, there's a film that I was helping out on that went to CPH Docs, and then there's a film that I'm distributing that went to Vision du Réal. And those are two documentary festivals in Europe that pivoted really quickly. They both pivoted immediately, and they created an online festival that tried to match the film festival experience as much as possible. You know, Vision du Réal happened in April, but they set up their online infrastructure almost immediately. And they limited the number of viewers, I think, to 500. It only, you know, it played for a week, you know, so they were very thoughtful about it. And I think about the experience. It obviously wasn't the same as being able to go there, have the interaction with the audience. But for that film, and Vision du Réal shows, I would say, more innovative or experimental documentaries. I mean, for that film to not have had that premiere and then to have had to wait, it would have been really tough on the filmmaker too. And that's what I think a lot of US filmmakers have been put in the position of with South by and Tribeca. So having had that premiere already at Vision du Réal, we can now discuss what's the future for this film. And we are thinking, instead of playing, you know, like, here's where the question of really distilling the value of film festivals comes in, because do we choose to spend another 6 or 12 months on the festival circuit when the festivals are all online? Or do we go straight into a virtual theatrical release? And the virtual theatrical release, to me, is a really interesting thing that's developed, because it has, at this moment, it's collapsed the demarcation between theatrical and non-theatrical. You can link your virtual theatrical release to what used to be non-theatrical spaces, universities or museums, even bookstores, right? Libraries. And for documentaries or for, you know, foreign language films, that's highly valuable. So there's this window right now, and I don't know how long it will last before, you know, this is taken over by the powers that be. But there's a window where a film that in the pre-COVID world would have shown in 1 or 2 theaters can now show in 100 virtual theaters, can create an event out of that, can create more awareness, more press. You know, that I think it's a very compelling argument versus the old path of playing festivals for a full year life cycle. So that's something I think that's a very personal decision, I think, for filmmakers to make, you know, and I'm giving my filmmakers a lot of space to think about that. But it's a really substantial choice right now.
It's not mutually exclusive though either. I mean, you can do a virtual exhibition tour and have festivals be part of that,
Right.
and share revenue and share promotion and marketing. By the way,
so are festivals participating in the virtual release?
Yes, some are. I don't know that everyone is, but definitely I've seen that take place with some. And, you know, and people are getting really creative with the virtual release, like Neon, even as a big distributor, but they're letting bars and NPR stations and people like that host screenings as well. So I think there's a win-win for everyone collaborating. And when the Festival Alliance has done their festival day where, you know, the same film was showing multiple places and they were all sharing revenue, that definitely is a model to keep repeating for sure.
And then I think they can slot into, I mean, I think windows are collapsing because now every format is talking about being on the same virtual bandwidth. But if we could build a version of festivals where, personally, again, I do not want to lose the in-person communion, like to sit next to a person and hear them laugh and hear them cry and to be able to network, like Brian said, like that is precious and unequaled in the world. And so don't lose your identities. Festivals, when we can gather again, people will want and need to gather again. But if extending your virtual life is helpful to your festival, it gives you a year-round brand, you're not bringing people into town, these models can fit into the self-distribution model or the non-theatrical model, which is where 99% of films will make their money, so that filmmakers' livelihoods can become sustainable. So that's what's exciting, is that if we can break down some of the old windows without potentially jeopardizing, and I do think it's possible, without jeopardizing a broadcast, or ultimately, I think streaming is less likely because the streamers are making their own content now. You have opened up the door into taking our art and finding a way to make it a living, which, you know, I think for most filmmakers, that's their wish. How do you make a living in your creative work? And I think festivals can be a huge part of that.
Well, and somebody I want to bring up, I'm not really watching the chat, but I did see a comment, and because I feel very strongly about this, but somebody said, film festivals have no money. I work for 5. We can hardly afford to pay our staff. How are we supposed to pay filmmakers? And, you know, when I say I have a love-hate relationship with festivals, this is a part of it, because I have worked for festivals too. I've seen big festivals not pay staff what they should, you know, take advantage of volunteers. Like, there are so many film festivals running with no money, running on shoestring budgets. And I think, Karen, that was the article I sent you this morning about, it was called, I think it was the New Yorker, and it was called The Case for Letting Restaurants Die. And it was all about inequality, underpay, understaffed, poor working conditions, no labor guidelines. Like, there's a world in the festival circuit that is not upholding those values. And I think the pay for filmmakers for me comes into that place as well, where, you know, the bulk of filmmakers right now do not get distribution deals that allow their financiers to recoup. I've had films that have been successful, and I have films that have made zero money, and ones that, you know, did play festivals that still haven't made money. And so I think, you know, when we look at reimagining festivals, Marilyn, you were already kind of starting to get into it, is how do we, particularly the regional festivals that I think most filmmakers really value because it hits audiences versus the big festival, which is all industry driven. How do we bring those into the distribution system versus just the festival circuit? What can we do as a community to support these regional festivals in a bigger way so that they can offer payments to filmmakers, so that it is part of the profit system, and not just us paying to go to all those festivals? Because like Karen said, producers don't pay. No one's ever paid for me to go to a festival, right? So it's like, we're also spending money to go. And so this goes back to the very first question, is like, who are festivals serving, and where do filmmakers fall into that mix? And are festivals responsible for our livelihood, where their livelihood is on our films? Like, it's just a weird kind of, it should be this symbiotic relationship, but a lot of times it doesn't feel that way.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time keeping up with the chat with 400 people on it.
I know.
So apologies to people who are trying to give us ideas and stuff. But I did see one comment on that from Jennifer MacArthur, who I know is a great person, that this is a political problem. And you know, the fact that we don't have state support for our arts world, including film festivals, means that they're all struggling and not able to make money. So I understand where that's coming from. And actually, in a time pre-COVID, if a festival was bringing out the filmmaker and doing a Q&A, you know, a lot of times filmmakers didn't really care about getting money either. It doesn't always have to be part of the equation. But I do think that if it's one of the only businesses where people routinely ask people to give away their artistic product for free. And I think if you're charging, and not every festival is charging, by the way, so I understand there's different models, but if you're charging for films online, that's changing the windowing model. That was never part of festivals before, and there needs to be a revenue system put in place. It doesn't have to be 50-50 or 70-30. It can be different models, but there needs to be some kind of payment model in place so that the filmmakers and the festivals can share in this as well. And it's also a matter of what can we build for the future. So maybe it doesn't work in a COVID year, but as we're building what's going to be part of virtual in the future, let's build that into the equation so that it's sustainable for both.
Yeah, I was going to say that, I mean, from my vantage point in Europe, which is where I am right now, you know, I wonder if the festivals have been able to pivot and to innovate because they have these things that, you know, the New Yorker article that you're talking about, I really like that part where he said, you know, don't ask for a bailout for the restaurant industry, ask for universal health care, you know, ask for these things that would transform the industry. And in France, you know, next week I'm going to go to a drive-in film festival, you know, where all the proceeds are going to local art house cinemas. It's just a different reality. And I've come to think, like, in this moment, what, you know, when the confinement started, I think it really hit me how many people were losing their jobs. And there's the idea of community, which I brought up earlier. I've struggled with it because it's something that I consider one of my values as a producer, but in certain moments I've realized it's not enough. Like, we need solidarity, and we need solidarity in action. And right now, solidarity means putting money in the pockets of people and places that are facing extinction. That is what this moment calls for. You know, I think talking is great, but real action. And I also look at China, which doesn't have a safety net and doesn't have, you know, they don't have any rights or, you know, that kind of guarantees. And when they lost their film festivals, there was so much creativity and so much resourcefulness, but like everybody pulled together because they knew there was absolutely nobody else but them that would save it. So when, for example, the government banned hotels and every single venue you could think of from allowing screenings, the festival organizers sent out a equivalent of a tweet asking audience members to show up for the 7 p.m. local train and to bring their laptop. And the people who came onto the train, you know, were given these business cards with this USB stick that flipped out. Everybody got on the train, opened up their laptops, put in the USB stick, watched the film. By the time the train had done the full circle, the film was done, you know, and then they had, you know, virtual Q&A. So there are these, just, I think, there's a lot of creativity in our community, and I would love to see that. And I think that we are early into this, there's a bit of wait and see. But for example, if festivals are participating in virtual theatrical releases where revenue is shared, that is a huge shift. You know, I've had a film, you know, that was at Tribeca Film Festival, a decade ago, and they had 6 screenings, all completely sold out. Tribeca asked if we could add 2 more. So then we had 8 screenings that were completely sold out. We didn't see any of that revenue. And then when our film opened in New York City, it made a fraction of, you know, because the audience saw it at the festival already. So that would be a huge shift if revenue sharing was available. But I also recognize that the staff themselves at film festivals are not being paid enough. You know, they're not being paid a living wage, right?
I mean, to your point, Karen, I think that's one of the things I've always marveled at was as I've rolled films out and done grassroots theatricals or non-theatrical campaigns, we're overlapping the same territory again and again. A festival then tweets out your screening. You know, the art house theater that you were going to be at theatrically was actually the place where you would have had a festival screening. There's all these separate silos. And so you know, when you talk about radical solidarity, I'm like, right on, because all of the players are in the same chain and we're doing different pieces of the pie. We're not working together to solve this. And I have to say, we aren't going to beat Netflix. Virtual streaming, like, they got more money for content that's what my brother's watching. He's not logging on to my films, you know? So we're not, why compete in that space? We're not gonna beat the streamers. We commune in person, and all of these different silos are doing their thing, and there's little bits of revenue to each. But if we could wrap our arms around it, filmmakers will hustle, right? And can we connect the mailing lists? Can we help each other live? Having done it over and over again, and every time we're reinventing the wheel, it's there. It just will take some organizational focus, said a producer. You know, just, it's possible. And so I worry that in the rush to go online, we're competing in a war we will never win. And so preserve what you are known for, and let's figure out how to do that together.
Well,
Yeah, I want us to say that if there is a moment for realizing that we are part of a supply chain, this is that moment. Like, we are part of an entire supply chain that if any aspect of it, theatrical, film festivals, is affected, it affects everything. Like, you know, talking to producers in China, I moderated a panel for Film Independent, and really the question that everybody wanted to ask was, are you back in production? How did you get back in production? What does production look like? And those producers who are maybe 2 months ahead of us, they were like, okay, let's stop talking about production because the theaters haven't reopened, which means the producers are afraid to go into pre-production on new films, which means the financiers are afraid to put money into those films. You know, it was this moment where it clicked for me, like, okay, we are looking at what's right in front of us, but yes, absolutely. This is the moment to recognize that we are part of an entire supply chain that's at risk.
I want to pose this question to you guys too, because I, wrote this piece a couple weeks ago called Survival of the Fittest, which was all about organizations coming together. And I got a lot of responses from organizations of that, like, well, look what we're doing type responses. And it, and I didn't ask this question in the article, which I should have, but I didn't think about it till afterward, is if we're talking about these organizations coming together, these festivals coming together, whose responsibility is it? Like, because very few people actually step up to lead and take charge of big ideas. So whose responsibility is it to, if this is what's needed and solidarity and collaboration, who does it? Because I always worry that nobody will. Like, everyone likes big ideas, but who actually implements ideas? And so whose responsibility is it to figure this out?
Rebecca, I want to let you off the hook because you're already doing Dear Producer and this webinar. So just try your job.
But I think it's a genuine question, that one that I personally keep thinking about. Like, I don't know who like, I can point fingers, but am I pointing them the right direction?
Yeah, I mean, I hear you. And as an organizer, also, I'm part of the Documentary Producers Alliance, where we're trying to gather producers. And I agree, it's like trying to put an octopus in a basket. It's just like, we need everybody to get their own leg in if we're gonna do this. I mean, there's a leadership role, I think, to be played by some of the larger, better resource festivals. But again, when we talk about what their mission is, they're very different than the regional festivals. And if they're, and asking some of the bigger players in our field who have the money, they're sponsors, but the sponsorship ends at a very particular level. It's hard to figure out where you begin changing the world.
Well,
Brian,
the problem,
you must.
Though, is that we used to have that organization. It was called AIVF, and it died. And when it died, people let it die. And a lot of us came together to try to save it, and it didn't work. It was too late. But I think we need to build that space again, where we can put together the producers and the film festivals and the different aspects of the business to have these conversations more regularly, because there are some systems that could be built that would be much more, make this a much more sustainable business if we did it together. So I think that's what's needed. But the other thing I wanted to say real quickly is, historically, whenever there's been a problem in the marketplace, it's been producers coming together that have solved the problem. That's why we got ITVS. And it's why we got most film festivals, actually, was from film producers coming together because they needed a solution. So I think that was one of the reasons of putting this panel together. And we, there was someone in the comments saying, why don't you have festival organizers? There's been those conversations too. We wanted to have one where producers could come together and talk about it from that aspect. But I think producers, your organization, Marilyn's one of them, but that's just documentaries. We need something that's thinking about all aspects of it, and as a producers organization coming up with solutions is what I think.
I mean, I guess I would just add that we have there have been so much organization around COVID. I mean, all of us are like zoomed out because of the number of meetings and convenings and conversations. So coalitions have been built. And the question is, have they been built only in service to COVID, which we hope will end? Or could those coalitions be the basis for what it looks like to move into the future, which would be my hope, that this is not temporary, that these conversations are not just of the moment, that we're not just thinking about virtual festivals because we're facing this global pandemic, but rather we're organizing because that's the future of our field. The whole world will move online if we let it. And we will miss human connection. If anything, if COVID taught us anything, it's like, get me out of these four walls. I love my children. Get me out of these four walls. We need this. So I hope, I don't know, but maybe I'll go back to the list of all the emails we've gotten, of all the conversations and all the gatherings, and see, is there someone in there who's willing to step up, who has some support to do it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say we have to save ourselves, you know, a version of what you guys are saying, but we have to save ourselves. And I really believe that it starts in our own corner. You know, I mean, I try to take individual responsibility for, if I can do something, you know, if I can send out a tweet and open my doors to any critics or writers or curators who've been laid off and they want a gig, I will pay them to write about any film in our collection. You know, I mean, it's something tiny, but I mean, that's what I mean by solidarity is, unfortunately, I think that our industry sometimes makes us, or forces us to act in our own self-interest, you know, to the detriment of others. And maybe not even in pre-COVID times, that was okay, but I'm hoping that we come out of this with a greater understanding of solidarity. Like, I look at Nevada City Film Festival, which is a local festival I work with, and they're trying to organize a drive-in that would purchase boxed meals from local restaurants. And that's not easy for them to do, but it's interesting because they're very clear about who they're serving, and they're also trying to support businesses that are a huge part of their local fabric at the same time. So, you know, I think that there are tiny things that each of us can do, but we do, you know, in an individual and collective way, we have to save ourselves.
A piece of it for me too is for filmmakers, like we started at the beginning, I was saying, you know, waiting for that golden ticket, right? And I think a big part of it is filmmakers, you know, realizing how distribution is changing even pre-COVID, how much it had already changed, how much the chance of you having a big premiere and having a big sale, you know, a lot of films from Sundance didn't sell this year. Filmmakers who still haven't sold their films, like distribution on its own is really changing, which is why we need to change the festival circuit, at least on the regional level, I think, to work into the distribution model, because there really isn't solid distribution for small films. If you're making a film under $1 million, especially if you're making film under $500,000, which a lot of us are, there is no distribution pipeline right now. So what are you going to do? And it's really, to me, a come to Jesus moment for filmmakers about distribution, which maybe then is what propels them to think about, how can we work with festivals? I would encourage filmmakers to work with the regional festivals to figure out how does that shift, and for festivals to be open to it, to be open to changing ways and changing schedules and what they do. I think what's been really hard for me during the pandemic is watching everyone try to hold really tight to what was pre-COVID, but was the festival circuit perfect pre-COVID? It certainly wasn't. So it's like, why are we holding on so tight? And I listened to a webinar last night, and it just felt like everyone's just kind of waiting it out for things to get back to normal. And maybe the major festivals can do that, and the top tier filmmakers can, but the majority of us can't. Brian, did you want to?
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And what I think is funny though is, like, in the comments, I've seen at least 20 comments fly by that said distribution doesn't work. Let's build a new system with festivals and filmmakers working together that would be a better distribution system. And I would love to see that. But then there's also a billion other comments saying, but we're too poor, we can't pay any filmmakers. And then other people are saying the value is marketing. Well, I don't get any value out of the marketing if it's everyone taking place at different times and I'm not getting any money out of it. So that's what I'm trying to say is, let's pull all these ideas together and figure out what's a system that would make festivals and distribution and shortening of windows actually work. And it's not been working in the past. The little piecemeal efforts we're getting now are going to maybe help save some people briefly, but let's actually use it as an opportunity to figure out a way. And maybe they still are at different times, but maybe there's a collective database that lets us better pull together the data on audiences and share things. But I just think it's crazy that right now, like Ashland Film Fest, which I love, it will be going on and showing films. But if I want to hear about that, I want to tell someone in New York, they can't watch the films because it's geo-blocked. And we're building that geo-block system to protect an old-fashioned distribution system.
Right.
Like, it's all being, it's all so disjointed. And what we need is to figure out, if we started from scratch and put all these problems together, what would be the solution we would build that would be better for everyone? That's what I'm trying to get to. And it's really hard to do in a chat window with thousands of comments going by and on a 1-hour phone call. But I think if we do more of these and start pulling people together, it would be great for us to be able to come up with a system that works for some portion of the other 98% that are not being helped by the old-fashioned system.
Well, and somebody just posted, like, you know, we had these conversations in 2008. Why is it more than a decade later, nothing's happened? And that goes back to my question of, well, whose responsibility is it? And to the filmmakers who are still waiting just for Sundance, just for Cannes, like, I think it is on us. And I think we've put ourselves into this place. And so that is why I asked that question, because there hasn't been any big systematic change in the festival world. I've been going, I worked in acquisition starting in 2001. I've been going to festivals since then, and I've not seen any big shifts in how the festival circuit works. So who takes it on?
Well, there's such differences between those big festivals and the regional festivals and how that works. And the big ones that are most prepared to do the most for filmmakers are going to be the least to change, I think, unfortunately, and maybe don't need to in some cases. They work as a part of a certain system. And I'm not arguing that what I do think should happen is the producers are going to have to solve this themselves. It'll be with collaboration with festivals and maybe even with some distributors. I think it could work all together. But no one's going to come to our rescue. You know, we have to build our own plan A, and that can include these festivals, but it would be a lot easier. Like, I've got a filmmaker right now that I'm working with that would love to release their film only through festivals and make that work, but they literally cannot do it when they're spread out across the country at different times and not coordinating it, because it's easier for them just to go build their own release. So I don't know. Yeah. I don't have the answer, but my hope is we can have these conversations and come to one.
Well,
I would just throw in there, you know, the Documentary Producers Alliance has now built out a regional committee because there are filmmakers living in all of these places. And not only should filmmakers be at the table for this, but I'd argue filmmakers should be working with their local regional festivals. We raise money from scratch. We raise money where the films are made. We raise money where we live. And I know it costs a lot of money to make a festival, and we're raising money for films, but again, there's a similarity in process that I think if we could get to the same table. You know, last night on the webinar, one of the festival programmers said, I don't know how the finances of that works, but we do. You know, we understand what the long life of a film is and what the finances of that look like and what nut we're trying to crack. We could be helpful to one another. So maybe we can't join a huge organization to have a centralized conversation, but then, hey, every festival programmer or regional filmmaker, if this is something you believe in and you want to build, find each other, talk to each other, learn the other end of the sausage maker and see if there's some common ground.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the one thing I do hope does not go back is, you know, the, I don't know what you call them, but the speed dating meetings, you know, like the market meetings where it's 20 minutes. And I mean, I prefer them the way they are on Zoom. You go into the breakout rooms and people are more focused and, you know, you don't have to travel. And those, I think, actually work really well. I think about film festivals also as cultural battlegrounds, you know, that Sundance and Cannes, I mean, this is where culture is decided. It's where film culture is decided. It's where national culture is decided. It's where popular culture is decided. And I think that, you know, it comes back to the question of who the festivals serve. And the answer to that question, to me, determines how well they might pivot or how well they might innovate or might not, right? And also who's excluded from those spaces, you know, what it takes to get into that space. Like you mentioned, Rebecca, the amount of money, you know, the networks, the access. And, you know, I look at the Asian American community, and film festivals close the door to many Asian American filmmakers, let's say in the late aughts, right? And those filmmakers went on YouTube. There was this thing called YouTube that was invented, and then they became YouTube stars. And those YouTube stars circled back to Hollywood, and then combined with the Asian American stars that came out of television, you know, created a more powerful Asian American cinema. So I think it's really interesting who the festivals include and exclude, and how that shapes our culture, and what this current moment means for that, where those battles are going to take place now, you know?
Well, and I think, you know, I do want to talk for a few minutes before we end just about ideas. Like, let's just skip the current crisis, because everyone needs to pivot in a way where they can stay alive. Like, I do understand that in this current moment, and it's only been a couple months, but let's say, you know, we come out the other end, and even say, starting with Sundance, we can gather at a certain capacity, not to the full capacity of Sundance, let's say, and, you know, is there a hybrid world? I think there's a lot of benefits to virtual. Like you said, it's access to people who wouldn't be able to access the festival. Though there's the problem of, what about communities that don't have the technology to access filmmakers virtually, films virtually? Like, there's that piece of it as well. But, you know, how could you see it working in the future, you know, after we get out of crisis mode and just having to put Band-Aids over everything really quickly? Do you guys have ideas on ways in which you would, an ideal scenario that you would see?
Well, it's really hard to solve everything in 1 hour. But I do think that if we had a system of, it's something more akin to the Festival Alliance Day, where everyone is at the same time showing the same film, that to me is the beginnings of something that could work really well, because it's helping the festivals and the filmmakers. They're both making money from it, and it's building audience, and it's able to break through the noise, because that's one of the other big problems. I barely have time to watch half these virtual festivals, because I've still got a queue filled to the brim on Netflix before that even happened. But if we could break through the noise by combining together more often, I think that would be a way to break down the traditional system and the traditional windowing.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see film festivals pay people fairly, you know, and also really think about the value. I think the value they can provide their community is clear, or maybe that's an easier path. And I hope that they maintain both, you know, in-person or drive-in or virtual, you know, every way that allows their community and their audience to access the films is great. But really think about, how do you provide value to the filmmaker? You know, whether that's the revenue share, which would be amazing, whether it's, you know, travel or a stipend or honorarium, direct connection with their audience. But the film festivals that can't, and that can't pay their staff fairly, I would challenge them to really ask why they're going forward. I mean, as a producer, we take that responsibility. If we can't pay people fairly, we really have to question if we have the right, you know, to make that film, right?
And in Michigan alone, there's probably a dozen film festivals. Why does there need to be a dozen? Like, what happens when all these film lovers come together to create something that works for the state versus every different city? I think about that a lot, in terms of the numbers of festivals we have, but everybody wants their own little piece in their city, and I get that too. So it's a tough space, but there definitely is more festivals than sponsors can support.
But maybe a communal way of being, where it could be a bigger list than just 12 or 16. There could be a lot of films available on a circuit where the festivals could work together to guest curate and pass that responsibility around each year. And those films travel with some degree of communal marketing, the filmmakers get money so that it's part of the distribution cycle. It opts into their non-theatrical or theatrical, or the windows are gone, or because they're not going to get onto a streaming service. I mean, you know, Brian, you've written about innovating around these virtual platforms. If we gathered all of these groups, they don't have to each reinvent the wheel, and they can build on one another and build on the mailing list. And so you can have 10 festivals in Michigan, but each city is taking their piece, and it's about gathering your local community. How do you scale that? because it does seem that does work on many other industries. Franchising works. It helps you get Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks on every corner, for better or for worse, but it makes it, there's a point of entry. So that would be my argument, is that, and the filmmakers, I think, then can also opt into a system that creates more order for them, so that they can continue to make these films that will then feed these festivals, and that communal relationship would be vibrant.
Because it's also a lot as a filmmaker to manage all these festivals. You want to play and you don't work, you can't take work, and then you don't make money, and then you're in a financial situation that is not sustainable, but yet you want to go to those festivals, you want to have that experience.
100%.
Well, we proved we don't have the answers. But to
A
be
lost hour.
I will say that if you were able to combine more of these festivals taking place at the same time, it would also solve some of the sponsorship problems. And I work with sponsors, and one of the problems is none of the smaller festivals have the numbers to get those sponsors interested. But when you combine them together and multiply that audience, it becomes more attractive to sponsors too. So I do think there are win-wins to thinking about more of those kind of collaborations.
Well, like a traveling festival per state, right? And so these organizations come together. I don't know, like I do believe there's a way. And I think, you know, in that article I wrote that I mentioned, Survival of the Fittest, the call to action was to come together and don't go it alone. Like, that's how I ended it. And I think that is how the independent community is going to get through this, is by coming together and not just protecting your own little place in the world. And I know there's conversations happening. That's not like I think none of this is happening, but my hope is that there actually is. I worry that as soon as we start pulling a little bit more out of the pandemic, those things stop, when really those things need to continue for the future, for our own industry and for our own well-being. Any last thoughts? Marilyn, did you have anything? You're not on mute, so.
I'm not on mute. I've
been watching your
I appreciate the willingness of 370 people to come commune. I appreciate, Rebecca, that you stood up and said, I'm going to do something, and you created Dear Producer and created webinars. So let Rebecca as our mascot. Let's like march forward, man.
And I want to say, this has been the most active. I get the chat afterwards, so I will read all your comments, and I will say this has definitely been the most provocative conversation. But just to know that, hopefully whatever, because I know there's a lot of festival workers, programmers listening, and hopefully what this shows is that we love the work you do, and we want you, and we need you. And even though we're challenging ways, it's not because we don't want you to exist, it's the exact opposite. And so just know that filmmakers, producers need you in the mix. And so that is really what this conversation is about.
We need you to preserve independent media. Otherwise it's all going to be made. It's just going to be made by the folks who have the most money to make it.
Yeah, and we were seeing that pre-COVID. So this really widened the gap, and we're seeing who's winning and who's losing, and it's very clear. But I do believe we can figure this out with big ideas and collaboration.
Yeah, and I want to say, if you're in a position to take bold risk, I'll be right behind you. You have my full support, you know. And I second everything you guys say. I mean, there's so much value that film festivals provide. It's hard to just cover that in an hour, but thank you guys for the conversation.
Thank you guys. And I know if the audience could clap, that I'll be clapping for you. So thank you, Karin and Brian and Marilyn, for having such a honest conversation and really challenging and coming up with ideas. So, and we will have the replay on afterward for everybody to share with others as well. So thank you everybody for tuning in, and wow, we'll pick this up maybe a few months from now and see where we are.
Looking forward.
Thanks, guys. Bye.